This is the Cato Daily Podcast for Saturday, June 13th, 2020. I'm Caleb Brown. While much of the rest of the country has nominally been mourning the killing of George Floyd at the hands of police, in Louisville, Kentucky, the focus has been Breonna Taylor, the 26-year-old EMT shot 8 times by police in a no-knock drug raid that, perhaps not surprisingly, turned up no drugs. Louisville this week banned those warrants. Radley Balko, media fellow at the Cato Institute and columnist at the Washington Post, says that warrant was illegal. We spoke Thursday, just hours before the Louisville City Council banned no-knock warrants. I am speaking to you from Louisville, Kentucky. You're in Nashville, Tennessee. And of course, Louisville has seen better days. The last few weeks here have been pretty rough for a lot of people. And so you wrote a piece recently detailing the warrant that was used to enter the apartment of Breonna Taylor, who was killed by police in March. You say that warrant was illegal. But before we get to that, what do we know about how warrants tend to be issued and executed for people's homes?
So the vast majority of no-knock warrants are issued to serve search warrants on people who are suspected of drug crimes. And the way it's supposed to happen is, you get a warrant, if you're the police, you knock, you announce yourselves, and you wait an appropriate amount of time for somebody, to come to the door. And the idea here is that you're giving them notice and the ability to let the police in without suffering violence to their person and the destruction of their property. And this is kind of couched in a centuries-old doctrine called the Castle Doctrine, which states that the home should be a place of peace and sanctuary, and the government should only violate that peace and sanctuary, under the most sort of extreme of circumstances. The Supreme Court recognized the Castle Doctrine in the early 90s in a case called Wilson versus Arkansas, but they also left open these three sort of exemptions to it. If the police can show that a suspect is a threat to attack the police, destroy evidence, or flee, they can get a no-knock warrant and they can conduct a no-knock raid. Well, the police departments across the country responded to that by basically using this boilerplate language in every search warrant in a drug case by claiming that every single drug suspect is a threat to flee or attack the police or destroy evidence. And in a subsequent case, the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. You have to give particularized information for each suspect. You can't just say all drug suspects as a blanket statement, present one of these exceptions. Unfortunately, in Hudson versus Michigan in 2006, the court said, okay, all that's true, but when police violate the knock and announce rule, we're not going to enforce the exclusionary rule, which means we're not going to throw out any evidence that they might find after they serve that warrant. And what it basically did is it made toothless every previous ruling about no-knock raids that the court had ever made, because there's no enforcement mechanism. The rule just exists on paper. And a lot of us at the time predicted that we were going to see police departments across the country violate the knock and announce rule sort of with wild abandon, because there was nothing preventing them from doing so. And so what we saw in the Breonna Taylor's case is exactly that. The police, and there were 5 warrants for that related to that investigation, one of them for Breonna Taylor's house. And under the section about no-knock warrants, there was the same cut and paste boilerplate language, word for word, that basically said these drug suspects are a threat to police, threat to attack police, destroy evidence, or flee. And the problem with that is the whole reason for that Supreme Court requirement for particularized information is that not all drug suspects are the same. And so they had their main suspect, but Breonna Taylor's only connection to that case was that she had dated the suspect several years earlier and had let him use her address to receive some packages. Now, she didn't, know. Well, she didn't know that those packages contained drugs, because they didn't contain drugs. In fact, we found out later that there were clothes and shoes in the packages. And yet she gets, because of this sort of boilerplate language, she gets lumped in with all the other suspects The judge grants the no-knock raid on her house, despite the fact that um, the warrant itself was illegal. And they conduct the raid, and tragedy results, which is entirely predictable. When you break into somebody's house in the middle of the night, somebody who isn't a criminal is even less likely to think that the people breaking down their door are cops, right? You think you're being invaded, and that's what her boyfriend did, Kenneth Walker. He fired one warning shot, and then they just opened up with a barrage of bullets that killed her. They ended up putting 5 bullets in the apartment next door where a pregnant woman was staying with her 5-year-old. Um, and it's infuriating, not just because of the police actions, but because of the actions of this judge who did not do her duty to protect and defend the Fourth Amendment. She just sort of gave police a rubber stamp to do whatever they wanted in these cases.
So there has been some reaction here in Louisville and elsewhere that these kinds of warrants that are, I mean, you say that the warrant is illegal, but it seems, at least as a technical matter, they're still being issued.
Yeah. Well, so about a year and a half ago, I did an investigation at the Little Rock Police Department in Arkansas, and I got 105, I believe it was, warrants over the last couple of years, no-knock warrants that the department had served across the city. And I came to this case because somebody had sent me video of one of the raids that they conducted, and in this video, just taken with a surveillance camera, um, they used explosives and they blew the door off the hinges. And in the video, you can see the door. The guy was sleeping on the couch, and the door flew across the room and landed him on the other side of the room on his couch. Um, you know, Extraordinarily violent, risky, reckless way to serve a warrant. And from that, then we started looking at other warrants that the department had served, and so we looked at 105, and then I believe it was 97 of them, of the 105 no-knock warrants. The police had used this exact word for word boilerplate language about making these blanket statements about drug deals, and the judges signed off on every single one of them. And I actually interviewed the judges. One would only talk to me on background, so I won't quote him directly. But the other one, who's now retired and lives in Colorado, had nothing thought she had nothing to apologize for. She said, she didn't think she had done anything wrong. And in fact, at one point, she said, "Well, you don't know what conversations I had with police officers, on the phone after they submitted their affidavits," which is kind of jaw dropping because a judge cannot issue a warrant based on information that's not in the record and not in the affidavit. If the cop had said something to her sort of on the phone that made her issue a no knock warrant or persuaded her, that should be in the record as well. And it wasn't. And so, what we're finding is just police departments and judges are completely defying these Supreme Court rulings, and they're doing it because there's no enforcement mechanism. The court has basically neutered itself when it comes to being able to actually enforce the rules that it's laid out.
So, as the mayor of Louisville, I think he initially said these warrants are going to have to go through the chief now, and then later said, "I'm just not going to allow the Louisville police to issue these." That's not a change in city statute, but a lot of states and perhaps now the feds might be looking at getting rid of these altogether. One, how confident are you that these states or the feds will follow through on that? But also, what changes if they are prohibited?
I'm skeptical that we're going to see laws banning no-knock warrants. I think there is a place for them, and that is when you have somebody who presents a legitimate threat to other people and needs to be apprehended immediately. So, like an escaped fugitive, or if you have a possible hostage situation. The problem is that they're overwhelmingly used to serve drug warrants, search warrants, not arrest warrants against people who are suspected of drug crimes. So you know they're primarily used as an investigative tool against people who have yet to even be charged with the crime. And of course, they're extraordinarily violent, and they're inflicting a lot of sort of pain and trauma on these people. Um, so I'm skeptical that we're going to see any sort of black letter law that's going to ban them outright. What I would like to see is legislation about forced entry, because the police will claim that this wasn't even a no knock raid on Breonna Taylor because they claim they knocked and announced themselves. Now the neighbors I guess I think we're up to 16 neighbors who say they never heard an announcement. And Kenneth Walker says he heard a knock, but no announcement. And that's why he assumed that they were criminals. Somebody was banging on the door.
He called 911.
Yeah, right. He called 911, which is not generally something you do after you've, consciously decided to take on a team of raiding cops. That's not, you don't see that very often. But it really needs to be about forced entry. And I think if the government is going to force its way into your home and kick down your door or take it down with a battering ram, they better have pretty damn compelling reason to do so. And right now, what we're seeing is all they have to do is suspect you of having, some illegal pot in your house, and that will justify them taking down your door. And I think it's time, way past time that we set that bar a lot higher. It should be the only reason that the cop should be able to kick down your door even after you've refused them entry, is if they have good reason to believe that you're a threat to other people, and that's just not the case with these drug warrants.
So you say you're not necessarily optimistic that they'll be gotten rid of, and that there may be good reasons to allow them to exist in narrow circumstances. But what is the role for the court at this point?
Well, I mean, judges need to start actually reading these warrants. I mean, it seems absurd to say, but my first book, Rise of the Warrior Cop, I went through what literature there is out there about how much scrutiny judges apply to drug warrants, and not surprisingly, it's almost none. And even if you get judges who do apply a lot of scrutiny, the police departments can simply shop the warrants around to judges that they know who they know will be favorable. So instead of a law that's going to say we're going to ban no knock warrants, or we're going to limit them, or we're going to limit no knock forced entry raids. One thing that would be really helpful is if people started paying attention to judicial elections and made this an issue. If a judge, listen, this judge in Louisville, I don't know anything about her as a person, but she failed at her job, and she failed at her job in a way that cost an innocent young woman her life. And, I, I kind of look at that the same way I would look at, say, a doctor who accidentally amputates the wrong limb, right? I mean, it may have been an honest mistake, but you make a mistake with those kinds of consequences, and maybe you shouldn't be allowed to do your job anymore.
Radley Balko is a media fellow at the Cato Institute and a columnist at the Washington Post. Subscribe to the Cato Daily Podcast wherever you please, and follow us on Twitter @Cato Podcast.